The girl who couldn't stand the sun *. The desert was silent. The wind was hot and dry. The sun was rising slowly over the red sky of planet Elarusevan. This place had no cities, no animals, no sound. Only dust, heat, and a broken science outpost forgotten by time. Inside that old outpost, a strange alert beeped. A motion detector had picked up something, or someone. The cameras turned. A figure was crawling in the sand. A girl. Her skin was glowing faintly. Her long silver hair was tangled with dust. She wore a torn spacesuit, but it was not from Earth. She was weak. Every time the sunlight touched her skin, it burned slightly like acid. The girl fell. She tried to cover her face with her arms, but the light still reached her. Her voice was soft. She whispered one word before falling unconscious. Human. Back in the outpost, a group of Earth scientists had just arrived. They were here to study solar radiation. But now, they had found something far more strange. Dr. Malik, a young scientist, ran outside with 2 robots. He lifted the girl in his arms and rushed her inside. Her body was too hot for a normal human. He placed her on the medical bed. "Get the scanner online," he said quickly. "She's not just injured. The sun is hurting her." The AI screen beeped. DNA, not fully human. Unknown hybrid structure detected. Everyone in the room went silent. "Who is she?" one scientist asked. "I don't know," Dr. Malik said. "But I think she came here. Looking for us." When the girl woke up, she screamed. The lights in the room made her shake with fear. "Turn off the lights," Malik shouted. Now, soon as the room was dark, the girl calmed down a little. Her eyes were glowing slightly blue. She looked at Malik with confusion. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're safe now," he replied gently. "We found you in the desert. What's your name?" She looked scared. Her voice was weak. "Alira. Why were you out there alone?" "Alira," she paused. Then, she looked at the ceiling. A beam of sunlight came through a crack. Her body moved away from it quickly. "The sun," she said. "It wants to kill me." Malik was confused. He had never heard such a thing. The sun was dangerous. Yes, but only with too much exposure. Not like this. He noticed something strange. Every time he stood close to Alira, her body stopped shaking. Her skin looked calmer. But when he moved away, she looked in pain again. "Do you feel better when I'm near?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Only humans. Stop the burning. Only your touch." The other scientists watched from the screen. "This is impossible," one of them said. "She reacts to light like a vampire." "But this is science, not fantasy." Later, the team checked her blood. Her DNA was mixed. Part alien, part human. A hybrid. "She's not just reacting to sunlight," Malik said. "She's breaking down. Like her body can't survive this planet anymore." "Then how is she still alive?" asked another. Malik looked at his hand. He remembered her words. She said, "Only a human's touch can save her." That night, Malik stayed beside her. She was sleeping, but her body glowed red under the moonlight. The lab's power flickered. Outside, the twin suns of Elarusevan were rising again. Suddenly, alarms started. Radiation levels rising. "Solar wave incoming." Malik looked at Alira. She was crying in her sleep. Her skin began to crack in places, glowing red hot. He didn't think. He grabbed her hand. At once, the glowing slowed. Her heartbeat calmed. The machines stopped beeping. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "You protect me," she whispered. "You are the cure." But the truth was darker. If only a human touch could save her. What happens when that human is gone? The morning sun rose again over planet Elarusevan, and its sharp rays touched the old outpost's outer walls with burning light, as if warning the people inside that something bigger was coming, and they were not ready for it inside. The outpost. Dr. Malik stood by the glass panel watching Alira sleep in the dark chamber where all lights were off and the windows covered, because even the smallest beam could hurt her skin, and she had told them the truth. Her body was getting worse, and her blood was changing too fast, and the machines were showing new signs of something unknown and unstable deep inside her. Dr. Malik walked to the lab, where the senior team was already arguing about the results they had found, and none of them had seen anything like it before, because her DNA showed 2 life forms trying to live together and failing slowly. She was not fully alien and not fully human, and that made her something rare and something dangerous. The computers said her cells reacted to solar particles in a violent way, but when near human skin the reaction slowed, like human energy was acting as a shield. One of the older scientists looked at Malik and asked if she had said anything about where she came from, or who her parents were, but Malik shook his head, because Alira only whispered one word again and again, and that word was human. The lead biologist opened a hidden database and played a recorded log from 20 years ago, when a secret Earth team had visited this same planet and tried to make peace with a powerful alien race called the Solari, who lived underground and feared sunlight. The log showed a young human woman named Dr. Ellen Hart working with the Solari leader, and then the video glitched and came back showing the woman was missing and never found again, and no one knew what happened after that. Moloch felt something cold in his chest, because the woman in the video looked like Alira, and her face was almost the same. Maybe the child was born here during that mission, and maybe Earth left her behind when the project failed. The other scientists looked shocked, but one of them said that if she was part Solari, then her body was not made for light, because the Solari evolved in total darkness, and the sun was poison to them. Moloch went back to the chamber and sat near Alira, who had woken up and was holding her arms tight around her chest, like she was scared of something inside her, not just outside. He asked her if she remembered her mother, and she said only a voice in dreams, and a smell like earth trees, and warm rain, and then tears fell down her face, and Malik could not look away. She asked if she was dying, and he wanted to lie, but he could not, so he said they would try everything, and she just nodded, like she had already heard that before. Suddenly, the AI voice broke the silence and warned them that solar radiation had increased, and a flare was heading toward the planet and would hit within hours, and the shelter would not hold long. Under direct exposure, Moloch had an idea and took a small blood sample from his own arm and placed it near Lyra's under the scanner, and something strange happened because the data showed a reaction between the two samples that slowed the breakdown in her cells. The machine said the human blood was creating a stabilizing effect, and not just from contact, but from something deeper like a frequency match or energy link. The team ran more tests, and the results were all the same, and then it became clear Alira could only survive if she stayed near a human, or received a regular connection from human biology, and that meant only one thing: she was made to be with humans. Not in fear but in balance. The system beeped again and showed an old locked file that opened with Moloch's ID, and inside was a report written by Dr. Ellen Hart before she vanished, where she said the Solari needed hope and that maybe the future of peace was a child who could live in both worlds. Moloch felt his hands shake because the girl was that child, and she was the key to something big, but also something fragile. The solar flare moved closer. Alira's skin started glowing again, and she cried out in pain, and Malik rushed to her side and took her hand and whispered that he would not leave her. She opened her eyes and whispered something he did not expect. You are not just my Kiru, are my anchor, and without you, I will fail. The chamber lights flickered, and the ground shook slightly, and the team outside shouted that the flare would hit in minutes and the shielding would fail, and they needed to move underground. Moloch looked at Alira and saw the fear, but also trust, and he knew he had to protect her, even if it meant giving his own life. He lifted her gently and ran to the lower vault, where old equipment from the first Earth mission was still stored, and maybe hidden answers waited there. As the door closed behind them and the flare struck above the screen, showed one last message from Dr. Ellen Hart: left for the future. If you find her, protect Herbie, 'cause she is our last chance. The flare came without warning, and the sky outside turned white, as if the sun had become angry and decided to burn everything that stood in its path. And inside the underground vault, the lights flickered, and the air grew heavy like a storm was pressing down on the world. Dr. Malik held Alira close, as the heat sensors screamed, and dust fell from the old metal ceiling, and the emergency systems barely held the shield together, while the flare passed over them like a wave of fire without mercy. She was shivering again, and her hands were cold, and her skin was glowing red in lines across her arms like rivers of fire under her skin, and he could feel her pain like it was his own, and yet he stayed beside her because every time he touched her she grew calm, and her heartbeat slowed. The old vault was filled with crates and broken machines and sealed cases, marked with the Earth Federation logo faded by time and covered in dust, and Malik knew this was all that remained of the lost science team from 20 years ago, and maybe something inside could help them survive. He opened each crate with shaking hands, searching for any clue or tool or hidden file, and inside one of the black boxes, he found a sealed tablet still working and protected by a strange casing, and when he turned it on, it asked for a voice match, and when Alira whispered her name, it unlocked a screen showed files labeled Project Daybreak and Operation Hybrid Hope, and Malik opened them with care, and what he saw made him stop breathing for a moment, because inside were detailed logs from Dr. Ellen Hart, explaining a dangerous experiment she had worked with the Solari, not just to study them, but to combine their DNA with human resilience to create a new form of life that could live in both worlds. and carry a bridge between light and dark. And Alira was the first and only success. But the project was shut down when solar patterns on LRU 7 shifted, and the twin suns began to emit a deadly new spectrum of radiation that caused instability in hybrid cells, and the Solari panicked and blamed the humans, and forced them to leave, or Alan Hart stayed behind to protect her child and never made it back, and the child was hidden by the Solari in an underground chamber that collapsed during a quake years later, and only now had she awakened and wandered into the sun. Moloch read the final line of the last entry, and his heart pounded, because it said the hybrid could survive the sun only if a living human maintained contact during exposure, or if a stabilizing serum was completed, using synchronized human DNA, and advanced Solari Nanatesh knew what it meant, and he knew what he had to do. The flare passed after 30 long minutes, and the systems came back online, and the lab above sent a message, saying the storm had caused massive damage, and that radiation was still high, and rescue was not possible for another full day. Alira sat against the wall, breathing slowly, and her eyes looked tired but still full of fire, and she asked Malik why he was still helping her when it was killing him. He did not answer with words, but walked over and took her hand again, and in that touch was every answer she needed, and she smiled weakly, because she understood now that he was not just her protector, but her connection to life itself. She asked if he believed in fate, and he laughed for the first time in days, and said he used to believe only in data and numbers, but now sitting underground holding the hand of a half-alien girl, burning from sunlight and dreaming of earth trees, he was not so sure anymore. They worked together the whole night, building a small chamber, using parts from old machines where Malik could lie beside her while the system injected tiny pulses of his energy into her body through linked sensors and nanite tubes, and though it was primitive, it might buy them time. The logs showed that constant exposure to human field waves could delay cell collapse. But it came at a cost, and the human donor would grow weaker as the bond deepened, and Malik saw his hands, already pale and shaking from just one day of contact. Still, he did not stop because she needed him, and he had chosen this. When morning came, the second sun rose again, and the vault heated up quickly, and the alarm warned of another radiation spike, and Malik stepped into the small chamber and held Alira close. As the systems activated the field outside, the heat grew stronger, and the wall sensors screamed again, and the power flickered. But inside the chamber, she stayed stable, and her skin did not crack, and her heartbeat remained calm as long as Malik stayed awake and connected. She whispered a story her mother used to tell her about a tree that grew in a world of fire and only bloomed when touched by rain, and she asked Malik if he thought she was that tree, and he said maybe. But if so, then he was the rain. As the hours passed, Malik began to fade, and his mind slowed, and the machines showed his vitals dropping, but Alira held on tighter and refused to let go, and deep in her blood, the nanites began to move faster, like they were waking up, sensing something new. Maybe it was love, maybe it was sacrifice, maybe it was the human will to protect even when dying. But something inside her changed, and the burning stopped. The silence in the vault was deep, like the calm after a great storm, and the only sound was the slow breathing of Alira and the weak pulse of Dr. Malik, who lay beside her, his hand still wrapped around hers, his energy almost gone, but his presence still keeping her stable, like a heartbeat echoing through to Botissa. Machines around them buzzed softly, and a faint green light blinked on the side of the chamber where the old tablet from Project Daybreak had just completed a hidden scan, triggered by the nanites inside. Alira's blood reacting to a sudden change, and opening a file locked for more than 20 years. Lyra sat up slowly, and looked down at Malik, whose skin was pale, and his breath thin and fragile, and her eyes filled with something new, not just pain, but a deep fear that she was watching the one person who had given her peace begin to slip away, and she could not allow that. She turned to the tablet and pressed her palm to the screen, and the old system recognized her touch as a genetic match to the original lead researcher, Dr. Ellen Hart, and with a soft beep, the screen came to life, showing hidden folders marked with red warning signs, and one title stood out among them. All file name Hybrid Protocol 0. She opened it, and a voice began to speak, soft and tired. It was the voice of her mother, recorded in the last days of the project, her tone full of urgency and love and truth. If you are hearing this, then my child has survived, and you have found her. And I thank you, whoever you are. I made mistakes and broke rules to bring her into this world, but I did it because I believed that life must grow from two sides, not just one, and that peace will never come until both light and dark find balance. She is not just a child, she is a key her body holds. The map to the nanite network buried beneath Alara 7, a living vault made by the Solari to protect their future, and locked by a bloodline code that only a hybrid can open. Kiara's hand shook as she listened, and the file continued revealing that the Solari feared the stars were changing, and that one day the planet would become unlivable for their kind unless they adapted, and that her creation was their hope to evolve through connection with humanity. But others, within the Solari government, opposed the plan and called it a betrayal, and started a civil divide. And when the flare storms began, and the humans had to evacuate, it was not just the sun that drove them away, but fear and violence and silence followed Dar. Ellenhart stayed behind to hide the child inside the temple core, far below the surface, and to seal away the nanite library that could one day hold the cure, not just for Alira, but for many others, if the DNA key could awaken it. The tablet displayed coordinates and a pathway beneath the vault they were in, now leading to a hidden chamber that had been buried and lost for decades, and suddenly everything made sense to Alirash. Looked at Malik again, and her heart ached because the serum her mother once tried to build was never finished, and only the source. Nanites could do that, but to get them, she had to go down into the dark. Alone she touched his face gently, and whispered that he had done enough, and now she would carry the rest, and she kissed his forehead, and wrapped him in thermal padding, and placed an oxygen mask over his mouth before locking the chamber in sleep mode, to keep him alive for as long as possible, with the coordinates in her mind, and a new fire in her blood. Alira stepped into the side tunnel, hidden behind a cracked wall, where a faint energy line pulsed like a slow heartbeat guiding her steps down into the ruins of the Solari Volta. Air was thick and dry, and the walls glowed with symbols that lit up as she passed like they remembered her and welcomed her home. And though the heat increased with every level, she kept walking. Her skin no longer burned, her blood no longer screamed, and she understood now she was evolving. At the bottom she reached a sealed door made of black crystal, and when she placed her hand on it, the stone melted like ice under flame. And the vault opened, revealing a chamber full of light and shadow, where machines pulsed in silence, and a single orb floated in the center inside. That orb was the source, the pure Solari nanite matrix, waiting for the signal, waiting for her. She stepped forward and opened her palm, and the orb responded, breaking apart into small, glowing threads that wrapped around her arms and chest, and entered her bloodstream without pain. And as they did, her mind filled with images of history, of knowledge, of her mother's voice whispering welcome. The system spoke one word. Bondadella felt stronger, faster, more complete, and the pain of the sun no longer frightened her, because now she was no longer just surviving, she was controlling it. She rushed back up through the tunnels faster than before, and reached Malik, just as his vitals dropped to critical, and without thinking she pressed her hand over his heart, and let the nanites flow into him, carefully weaving his broken cells together, not changing him, but healing him. His eyes opened slowly, and he looked at her like he was seeing a new world, and she smiled and said, "One thing, I found it now, let us save them all." The wind above ground was hotter than ever, and the twin suns of Seven hung in the sky like two burning eyes, watching every living thing below, as if daring them to survive another day under their endless gaze. And deep inside the outpost, where shadows still clung to the corners of old walls, something had changed. Forever Lyra stood tall, her skin no longer glowing with pain but with light and calm, and the nanites inside her moved like a river, flowing with purpose, controlled and precise, as if they finally understood who she was and what she could become. Beside her, Dr. Malik sat awake but weak, his hands trembling slightly as the healing continued inside his body, and though his voice was low, his eyes held something stronger than before, something like wonder, or hope, or maybe love. "You should not have done that," he whispered, and she only smiled because she knew that saving him had saved her too, and without him she would never have seen the truth of her own strength. The data from the vault had revealed more than secrets and coordinates. It had shown potential and power, and also danger, because the nanites were not just a cure, they were a weapon, and in the wrong hands they could rewrite biology on a massive scale and destroy what they were meant to heal. Alira and Moloch knew they had little time before others came, because the flare had not just affected the outpost, it had sent out energy waves strong enough to be picked up by any scanner across the region, and already dark signals were moving across the sky. The rebels, the ones who hated hybrids and feared human touch and light and anything that tried to unite two different kinds into one, they were coming. Moloch loaded the last of the medical packs into the rover, while Lyra stood before the terminal, linking her bloodstream to the station's core, where she could run simulations and test the stability of what they now called the human cure, a serum made from her hybrid blood, enhanced with synchronized human DNA, and filtered through Solari nanotechnology. Logikit pulsed inside the vial with soft blue light, like the first color of morning after a long night, and it held a promise to save not just her, but others who lived in the shadows, or who had lost the balance between who they were and what the world made them become. But There was a catch: the cure worked only if it bonded first with a full human, who shared the genetic resonance of peace and willingness, not control or fear or force, and that meant the first subject had to be someone pure in intent and willing to accept the weight of transformation. Moloch did not hesitate. He stepped forward and placed his palm on the injection pad, and looked at Alira with quiet trust, and she looked back with something between pride and sadness, because she knew what this choice could cost him. The machine activated, and the serum entered his body, and for a moment, nothing happened, and then, everything changed. His breath caught, and his heart raced, and light poured through his veins like tiny stars lighting a dark sky. And then his body steadied, and the system flashed a green signal: compatible. He was stronger, but not changed, and the serum had adapted to him without damage, and that meant it was safe. Outside alarms sounded as the motion sensors detected movement. Across the western ridge, and through the static-filled screen, they saw figures moving in formation, armed and fast, and without hesitation they had less than 1 hour. Moloch and Alira packed the last data drives, and locked the lab systems into self-destruct mode to prevent the cure from falling into the wrong hands, and then activated the rover's core, and began driving toward the mountain pass, where an old satellite uplink still waited on Sif. They could reach it. They could send the cure's formula back to Earth, and to any other safe stations across the stars, where others like Alira might still be waiting in fear, under the same suns. The road was rough and broken, and the heat made the sky shimmer like a living thing, but they drove on, and each mile felt heavier as the enemy came closer, moving like a dark wind behind them. At the base of the mountain, they abandoned the rover and climbed by foot, carrying the last of the gear, and supporting each other when the path turned steep and the rocks gave way, and still they did not stop, because there was no other choice left. Near the peak, the air turned dry and thin, and the uplink tower rose from the stone like a skeleton reaching for the sky, and when they reached it, the console was dead, covered in dust and silence. But Alira reached out and touched it, and the nanites moved from her fingers into the machine, and it woke with a slow hum and a soft light. The connection was fragile but real, and Moloch uploaded the files and sent the signal, and watched as the satellite blinked once, then again, and finally, green sex far below. They saw dust clouds rising from fast vehicles closing in, with weapons ready and hate burning in their eyes, and Moloch turned to Alira and asked if she was ready, and she nodded without fear. This time they would not run. This time they would stand and fight for those who were still hidden and forgotten and waiting for light. The sky above the mountain turned from red to white as the second sun rose higher, casting sharp shadows across the stone and metal, and fire burned through the thin air like a silent scream, while below the ridge dust clouds swirled and armored vehicles came closer, each carrying soldiers with cold eyes and weapons pointed toward the last hope of peace. Moloch stood beside the old uplink tower, his breath steady, his hands tight around the last data drive, now emptied and sent, and his heart pounding not from fear but from the weight of what was coming. As Alira stood just ahead, her eyes glowing with the steady rhythm of the nanites flowing through her veins, like stars waiting for ignition. They had sent the cure, they had done what they came to do, but the ones approaching would not care, because the cure was proof of unity, and those men were built on division and fear, and they would destroy anything that reminded them of what they could not control. Elor looked down the mountain and saw them scatter into formation and spread like hunters, and she remembered the dreams of her mother, speaking of a day when the world would try to erase her, and on that day, she would have to choose to stand or vanish, and now that moment was here. Moloch turned to her and asked one last time if she wanted to flee and find shelter, but she shook her head, because this mountain was no longer a place to hide, it was a place to rise. Though rebels reached the lower pass and opened fire, sending lines of burning plasma into the stone, but the mountain held, and the two stood still, letting the dust swirl around them like a shield of silence, and time itself seemed to pause as they raised their hands together, not in surrender but in readiness. The nanites within Alira responded to the heat and fear and activated a defense mode, drawn from the Solari archives stored deep in her memory, and a field of light formed around her body, shifting and bending like a living shield that caught the incoming shots and turned them to smoke. Moloch stood just behind her, holding the signal booster, taken from the uplink tower, which now pulsed with energy from the same nanots, and he used it to reflect the beam outward, not as a weapon, but as a message, a sound wave of harmony that disrupted the enemy comes and confused their targeting systems for a moment. Chaos broke through their ranks, and in that moment, Alira stepped forward and let her voice rise across the air, clear and calm, and full of strange power, and she spoke not with anger, but with truth, telling them she was born of light and dark, and had chosen both, and that no wall would stand between them any more. of the soldiers stopped their attack, hearing something in her voice that made them hesitate, as if something buried deep inside them remembered what peace once felt like before orders turned it to ash. But others kept firing, blind and furious and driven by the only thing they understood. Hate. A heavy blast hit the stone just beside Malik and threw him to the ground, and the booster rolled from his hands, sparking and broken, and Alira rushed to him, her shield flickering and her arms around him, pulling him back into cover, while the ground trembled from the weight of another flare forming in the sky. The second sun grew brighter, and the system alarms in her mind screamed of incoming radiation levels far beyond safety, and the nanites warned that no shield could hold it alone, and she understood. What she had to do there was one last function in the core, one that had never been used, one that could pull the flare energy inward and burn it out through her body like a filter, but it came with a cost, because it would use everything she had, and maybe more. She looked at Malik, who lay breathing but broken, and whispered his name, and he opened his eyes slowly and saw her face glowing, not with fear but with peace, and he knew what she had decided, and he tried to stop her, but she kissed his hand, and said it had to be this way. She stood once more, stepped into the open, raised her arms, and called to the suns, not with anger but with purpose, and the flare began to bend toward her, pulled by the signal, now echoing through her blood, and the sky lit with white and gold, and the wind roared, and time seemed to freeze. The enemy stopped firing, blinded by the light, unsure of what they were seeing, and for a moment every voice went silent, and every weapon was still, as Alira's body became the center of the storm, drawing in the fire and breaking it down, until only light remained, and then even that began to fade. When it was over, the mountain was quiet again, and the second sun dimmed, and the flare passed, and the air cooled, and only the sound of soft footsteps broke the silence as Malik stood slowly, eyes wide, heart heavy, calling her name into the wind. He reached the place where she had stood, and found nothing but light traces of glowing dust swirling around a single crystal left behind. And in that crystal, her voice whispered one last time, "I am not Ganai, am part of the Quran. One day I will return when the sun no longer kills, when light and dark can walk together. Until then, protect them and remember me." The world was quiet again, and the twin suns hung high above like soft lanterns, no longer screaming with fire, but glowing with distant sorrow, as if they too had watched her vanish, and now waited for what would come next. And far below the mountain, a soft breeze moved across the rocks, carrying dust and light and memory together like old songs in a forgotten language. Dr. Malik stood at the edge of the summit, where she had last stood, where the flare had touched her, and where she had given everything, not in anger, not in fear, but in love and purpose. And he held the crystal she had left behind, small and glowing faintly with warmth, and he closed his hand around it and felt her voice once more in his heart. He had stayed on Ilara 7, not because he was ordered to, not because of duty, but because he had made a promise to someone who was more than human, more than Solari, more than anything the galaxy had seen before, someone who taught him that peace was not just the absence of war, but the presence of understanding. Days that followed were full of work and silence, and long walks through the outpost where machines still clicked, and wires still sparked, and he built again. Not weapons, not shields, but hope. He used the data from the uplink, the map of the network, the serum formula, the archived thoughts Alira had passed into the system through her nanites, and her sacrifice, and he spread it across every possible channel. Every human station, every Solari archive, every hidden hybrid outpost forgotten and buried in dust. The signal went far and wide across space, carried by satellites and whispers bouncing through the stars, until it reached ears that still listened, and hearts that still beat for something better. Took time, it always takes time, but the message arrived. Then they came. First came the silent ones, the Solari, who had fled into deeper shadows long ago, now walking again under filtered skies, unsure but alive and drawn to the voice in the code that spoke of balance and truth, and the child who burned to bring light to their darkness. Then came the lost, the hybrids scattered across moons and stations, living in fear of both sides, marked as broken, but now called to something greater. And when they heard her name, they wept because they thought they were alone, and now they knew they were not. And then the humans came, not with warships, not with chains, but with open hands, because they too had changed, and some remembered the Daybreak program, and the warnings, and the hopes, and they followed the trail left by Alira, not to conquer, but to connect. Moloch became something else, not just a doctor, not just a witness, but a keeper of her story, and he spoke often, not of her powers or her pain, but of her heart, and how it never gave up even when the world tried to break it again. And again he kept the crystals safe in the new temple, built on the summit, not as a place of worship, but as a place of memory, where Solari and human and hybrid children could come and touch the stone and feel the warmth, and hear the soft hum of her energy, still moving through the world. They called it the Heart of Light One. Day a girl asked him if she would ever return, and Malik smiled with tired eyes and said, maybe not in the way you think, but maybe in the wind, maybe in the sun, maybe in the way you hold someone's hand and make them feel whole when the world tries to pull them. A party is past, and the planet changed. The solar flares grew weaker as the Solari technology began to repair the broken rhythms of the stars, and for the first time in decades, the sky was blue without fear, and green things grew again from red soil, and children played in sunlight without pain. The cure became more than medicine. It became a symbol not of science alone, but of union, of a touch shared across two worlds and many lives, and it carried not just data, but dreams. On the anniversary of her final day, they gathered at the temple and held hands in silence, and the lights dimmed, and the crystal glowed softly, and Malik spoke her name, and the children whispered it back, and in that moment, she was there, not in body, not in voice, but in all of them. He looked up at the sky, and remembered her eyes and her words, and he said them one more time, not just for himself, but for the future. It was not the sun that gave her life. It was the human who touched her heart, and it is the heart that lives forever.